Good evening. Today is August the 8th, 2024, and I want to go back in time 50 years to events that occurred on August the 8th, 1974. I remember that era quite well. On August the 8th, 1974, I was 23 years old. I was living at 1015 Spate in my hometown of Waco, Texas. The apartment where I lived is no longer standing. It was just a few blocks from the campus of Baylor University. Just a few months earlier, well, actually 3 months in May, I completed my coursework at Baylor, working on my MA degree in Church State Studies. I was writing a thesis on the Nation of Islam, or Black Muslims. And I was active at St. Mary's Baptist Church under the leadership of the Reverend Dewey Pinckney. It would be the following year that I would join the African Methodist Episcopal Church. I was active in Masonry, and my 8 to 5 Monday through Friday job was with Barron's Incorporated, a wholesale drug distributing company, one of which I was told at the time was one of the oldest businesses in Waco. I started there during the summer, and I remained there until the 1st of December, when I relocated to Teague, Texas, and took a job with the Texas Department of Public Welfare, now Health and Human Services. But I was keeping up with politics. I was 2 years earlier, on June the 17th of 1972, a break-in occurred at the Democratic National Headquarters at the Watergate Hotel in Washington, D.C., with sponsored by a group called CREEP, that was Citizens Committee to Reelect the President. Richard Nixon was president at the time, and on November the 7th of 1972, he won a landslide re-election victory over George McGovern. But the break-in at the Democratic headquarters would be a major news item for the next 2 years. And the question, how much Nixon knew and when he knew it, would be asked repeatedly during this time. And the authorities knew they were on to something, because not very often you find burglars in business suits. And 2 years ago at Bethel AME Church in Corsicana, I preached a sermon on Watergate in ancient Israel and modern America. In the 8th chapter of the book of Nehemiah, it describes a covenant renewal ceremony at the Watergate. And the focus was upon keeping the law, whereas Watergate in America was on breaking the law. On August the 5th, 1974, several of President Richard Nixon's taped Oval Office conversations were released. The Supreme Court told him he had to. One of them, which was described as the smoking gun tape, was recorded soon after the Watergate break-in, demonstrated that Richard Nixon had been told of the White House connection to the Watergate burglary soon after they took place, and that he approved a plan to thwart the investigation into it. Nixon's popular and political support diminished substantially following the tape's release. Then he met with Republican congressional leaders 2 days later on August the 7th and was told that he would face certain impeachment in the House and subsequent removal from office in the Senate. The delegation to the Oval Office was led by Arizona Senator Barry Goldwater, who had been the 1964 Republican presidential nominee. And Goldwater updated Nixon on these things, and when Nixon asked him how many votes he had, Goldwater responded, "You sure don't have mine." And it turned out there were about 10 or 12 members of the House that were not going to vote for impeachment. And there were 4 or 5 senators who were not going to vote for removal from office. But basically, he saw the handwriting on the wall. And he knew his presidency was effectively over. He finalized his decision. His speechwriter, Raymond K. Price, wrote the resignation speech. It was delivered on the evening of August 8th, 1974, from the Oval Office and was carried live on radio and television. Part of this speech said, "Good evening. This is the 37th time I've spoken to you from this office, where so many decisions have been made that shape the history of this nation. Each time I've done so to discuss with you some matter that I believe affected the national interest. In all the decisions I've made in my public life, I've always tried to do what was best for the nation. Throughout the long and difficult period of Watergate, I felt it was my duty to persevere, to make every possible effort to complete the term of office to which you have elected me. In the past few days, however, it has become evident that I no longer have a strong enough political base in the Congress to justify continuing that effort. As long as there was such a base, I felt strongly that it was necessary to see the constitutional process through to its conclusion, that to do otherwise would be unfaithful to the spirit of that deliberately difficult process and a dangerous, destabilizing precedent for the future. But with the disappearance of that base, I now believe the constitutional purpose has been served. There's no longer a need for the process to be prolonged. I would have preferred to carry through to finish wherever the personal agony would have been involved. My family unanimously urged me to do so. But the interest of the nation must always come before any personal considerations. From the discussions I've had with the congressional and other leaders, I've concluded that because of the Watergate matter, I might not have the support of the Congress that I would consider necessary to back the very difficult decisions and carry out the duties of this office in the way the interest of the nation would require. I've never been a quitter. To leave office before my term is completed is abhorrent to every instinct in my body. But as president, I must put the interests of America first. America needs a full-time president and a full-time Congress, particularly at this time with problems we face at home and abroad. To continue the fight through the months ahead for my personal vindication would almost totally absorb the time and attention of both the President and the Congress, in a period when our entire focus should be on the great issues of peace abroad and prosperity without inflation at home. Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow. Vice President Ford will be sworn in as president in that hour. And the following morning, he submitted a signed letter of resignation to Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, becoming the only U.S. president to resign from office. He had been elected for the first time in 1968 and reelected in 1972. His running mate both times was former governor of Maryland, Spiro Agnew. In October of 1974, Agnew resigned in a scandal, and various Republicans were considered for Agnew's successor. As my understanding, a group of Democrats met with Nixon in the Oval Office and told him if he nominated Michigan Congressman Gerald Ford, they would confirm him as president. And it turned out he did nominate Ford, and Ford was confirmed without major opposition. Sworn in as vice president on December 6, 1973, and then as president on August 9th, 1974. He's the only man to have served in those offices, not having been elected to either one of them. About a month later, Ford pardoned Nixon. He justified it on grounds that so much of his waking hours were devoted to Watergate. He said, we got big issues to deal with this. We got to deal with inflation. We got to deal with Vietnam. There's just so many things on the table, and so much of his time was devoted to Watergate. He felt like by pardoning Nixon, he could put the matter behind him and move forward. But he underestimated the impact that pardon would have on how unpopular it would be. And then that was a contributing factor, though probably not the only factor, that led to his defeat by Jimmy Carter in 1976. I like Gerald Ford. I feel he was an honest man and a good president. Yet that decision to pardon Nixon was not his finest hour. Well, what relevance does that have to today? Well, quite a bit. Had Nixon gone to trial and maybe done time, the whole issues we're dealing with now regarding presidential immunity, we wouldn't be dealing with it. And so, anyway, this was a very historic day on August the 8th of 1974. If anybody listening and you were here then, old enough to know what was going on, you probably have some memories. If you were too young to know what was going on, that's a different thing. If you're not yet born, then of course that's the case. But anyway, hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope everybody has a good evening and a good day tomorrow. God bless.